everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're tackling autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
And, it's a condition that's getting a lot of attention these days.
It is.
And for good reason. It affects something like 1 in 100 children globally.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've even seen some experts saying that number could be even higher.
Yeah, that would surprise.
Especially when we're talking about females.
Yeah.
Because they present differently sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's something we definitely want to touch on today.
Okay, so let's jump right in. So first things first. When we say autism spectrum disorder, what are we really talking about? What does that spectrum actually mean?
Well, the spectrum part is crucial here, because it really highlights the fact that ASD isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right.
There's a huge range of experiences within this diagnosis, and it's absolutely crucial to understand each individual's unique strengths and challenges.
Okay, so could you maybe give us an example of how that might look? Like, what are some of the differences we might see between two people who are both diagnosed with ASD?
So imagine you have two people, both on the spectrum. One might be completely nonverbal, meaning they communicate using alternative methods like sign language or visual aids. The other person, on the other hand, might be incredibly verbal, maybe even considered chatty. Both are on the spectrum, but their experiences are totally different.
So no single checklist applies to everyone, right?
Exactly.
Got it. So let's dig into the big question. What causes ASD? Is there one root cause?
Well, if only it were that simple. We'd have this all figured out by now.
Right.
But the reality is it's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
ASD is what we call multifactorial.
Multifactorial.
Yeah, so it's not just one single cause, but a whole bunch of factors interacting together. Genetics might load the gun, but environmental factors pull the trigger.
Okay, that's a powerful analogy.
Yeah, it kind of gets the point across,
So can you give us an example of how that might work in real life?
Absolutely. Let's talk about genetics for a second. Twin studies show that if one identical twin has ASD, there's a greater than 90% chance that the other twin will too. So genetics definitely plays a big role.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. And scientists have even pinpointed specific genetic mutations that increase the risk.
Like what?
Well, there's something called 15q duplication.
15 what?
15q duplication. Basically, it means a segment of chromosome 15 is duplicated. And we know this is associated with a higher risk of ASD.
Okay, I think some of our listeners might need a little breakdown of what that actually means. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So our genes are organized on these structures called chromosomes.
Right.
We inherit one set from mom, one set from dad.
Right.
And sometimes during cell division, when cells are copying themselves, errors can occur. Part of a chromosome can get duplicated. In the case of 15q duplication, part of chromosome 15 gets copied, and that can disrupt normal brain development.
Got it. So genetics is one piece of the puzzle, but you also mentioned environmental factors.
Right, and this is where it gets even more interesting and complex, to be honest. We're talking about a whole range of things here. Advanced parental age at conception, complications during pregnancy or birth.
Oh, like what?
Things like preterm delivery, being born prematurely. Exposure to certain medications prenatally has also been linked to increased risk.
So it sounds like we've got this interplay between genes and environment.
Absolutely. It's like genetics might create a predisposition, but then the environment can influence how those genes actually express themselves.
So fascinating. Okay, we talked about genes and environment. Is there anything else that researchers are looking into these days? Because I feel like I'm always reading about new discoveries.
Oh yeah, there's always something new popping up. One area that's really gaining traction is the connection between the gut and the brain.
Oh yeah, the microbiome.
Yeah.
I'm hearing so much about that lately.
It's all the rage, right? Yeah, but for good reason. So you've got trillions of bacteria living in your gut, and guess what? They can actually impact brain development.
Wow. So what's the link to ASD specifically?
Well, emerging evidence suggests that the gut microbiome composition in people with ASD might be different. Now, we're still in the early stages of research here, but some scientists believe that imbalances in the gut microbiome could contribute to neurological differences we see in ASD.
It's pretty amazing to think that what's going on in our gut could have such a profound impact on brain development.
Right. It's wild.
Okay, so with all these factors at play, genetics, environment, the gut microbiome, how does this actually translate into the brain? What's going on at a neurological level in someone with ASD?
That is the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question.
Right.
Here's what we think. ASD likely stems from atypical brain development and connectivity. And these differences, get this, they start super early. We're talking prenatally.
So even before birth, the brain is developing differently.
Yeah. Think of it like this. Your brain is like a complex network of roads and highways.
Okay.
Information travels along these pathways to allow different parts of your brain to talk to each other. Now, in ASD, some of these connections might be underdeveloped, some overdeveloped, or even misdirected. And that leads to differences in how information is processed.
Okay. That's a really helpful analogy, by the way. Helps me actually picture what might be happening in the brain.
Yeah, I like using visuals to explain things. Makes it easier to grasp.
Definitely. So if these brain differences are present from such an early age, when do they actually start showing up in a child's behavior? Like, when should parents start paying attention and maybe seek professional help?
That's a great question, and it really leads us into the diagnostic process. A lot of it comes down to observing specific challenges and patterns of behavior.
Okay, so what kinds of things should we be looking for?
Well, one of the core areas is social communication. For example, a child with ASD might have trouble making eye contact, understanding facial expressions, those kinds of social cues.
Right, so social interaction can be tricky.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any other red flags that parents should be on the lookout for?
Oh, absolutely. Another big one is behavioral patterns. You might see what we call restricted or repetitive behaviors.
Okay, like what?
Things like hand flapping or rocking back and forth, or maybe they have these intensely focused interests, like becoming fixated on a particular topic or object.
Right, so those behaviors, I mean, they might seem a little unusual to someone who doesn't understand ASD.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing they serve a purpose for the individual, right?
Exactly. They can actually be a way for people with ASD to cope with a world that can often feel overwhelming, unpredictable. It's like a way to self-regulate and find comfort in a world that can feel chaotic to them.
That makes sense. And I know we've touched on sensitivities before. But can you explain that a little more? Like, what does that actually mean for someone with ASD?
Sensory sensitivities are a huge part of the ASD experience. Basically, it means individuals with ASD might react differently to sensory input.
Okay.
Some might be hypersensitive to things like loud noises or bright lights, find them extremely distressing.
Right.
While others might be hyposensitive, meaning they crave intense sensory input.
So it's not just about social and behavioral differences, but also how the world is experienced on a sensory level.
Exactly.
Which can be quite different for someone with ASD.
For sure.
Okay, so let's say a parent or caregiver is noticing some of these signs. What's the next step? How is ASD actually diagnosed?
Well, the gold standard for diagnosing ASD is the DSM-5.
DSM-5.
Yeah, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It basically provides a framework for clinicians to assess and diagnose a whole bunch of mental health conditions, including ASD.
Okay, so how does that actually work? Like, is there a blood test or something?
I wish it were that simple. Unfortunately, there's no single blood test or brain scan that can definitively diagnose ASD.
Right.
It's a clinical diagnosis based on a really thorough evaluation.
So what does that evaluation look like? Who's involved?
You usually have a whole team of specialists working together, a multidisciplinary team. This might include a developmental pediatrician, a psychologist, a speech-language pathologist, maybe an occupational therapist.
So they're all looking at different aspects of the child's development and behavior.
Exactly. They bring their own expertise to the table, providing a comprehensive assessment.
That makes sense given the complexity of ASD.
Yeah, it's not a simple diagnosis to make.
Okay, so let's say a diagnosis is made. What happens next? What are the treatment options for someone with ASD?
Another great question. The first thing to understand is that there's no cure for ASD.
Right.
But there are many effective approaches and therapies that can help people with ASD live really fulfilling lives, thrive and reach their full potential. One of the most important things is early intervention.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
The research is really clear on this. The earlier we can provide support, targeted therapies, the better the outcomes tend to be.
So what are some of those evidence-based therapies that you'd recommend?
Two that come to mind right away are applied behavior analysis, or ABA for short, and then the Early Start Denver model, or ESDM. Both of these have been rigorously studied and shown to be really effective in helping kids with ASD develop crucial skills.
Can you give me a little breakdown of each, like what makes them so effective?
Sure. Let's start with ABA. It's a very structured therapy that focuses on breaking down complex skills into smaller, more manageable steps. And the therapist uses positive reinforcement to teach new skills and reduce any problematic behaviors that might be present.
Yes, it's really tailored to each child's needs.
Absolutely. Every child is different.
Okay, and what about ESDM? How's that different from ABO?
So ESDM takes a more play-based and naturalistic approach.
Yeah.
It's all about using the power of play to teach social communication and interaction skills in young children.
Got it. So it's about integrating learning into everyday activities and play.
Yeah, exactly. It's making it fun for the kids.
Makes sense. And both ABA and ESDM have shown to be effective.
Oh yeah, tons of research backing them up. They've been shown to have significant positive impacts on things like language development, cognitive skills, adaptive behaviors.
It's amazing to hear about the positive impact these therapies can have.
Yeah, it's really encouraging.
But I'm also wondering about other types of support, like speech therapy or occupational therapy. Do those play a role as well?
Absolutely. They can be incredibly valuable. Speech therapy can help with language development, communication skills, social interactions, and occupational therapy focuses more on improving daily living skills, like sensory integration, motor skills, things like that.
So it's really about addressing the whole picture, right? Not just focusing on one specific area.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach.
You mentioned earlier that there's no cure for ASD. And I'm wondering about the role of medication. Is there a place for that in managing ASD?
That's a really common question, and it's important to be clear. Medication doesn't cure ASD.
Right.
But it can be helpful for targeting specific symptoms or co-occurring conditions that often come along with ASD.
Okay, like what?
Think anxiety, depression, hyperactivity, things like that.
So it's about managing those additional challenges that can make life harder for someone with ASD.
Exactly. So, for example, antidepressants might be prescribed for anxiety or depression, while antipsychotic medications might be used if there's severe irritability or aggression.
Makes sense. We've talked a lot about the challenges of ASD, but I'm also curious about the strengths and talents that often go hand in hand with ASD. What are some of the things that individuals with ASD might excel at?
Oh, I love that you're asking this. It's so important to shift the focus from limitations to possibilities. One area where individuals with ASD often really shine is visual thinking and detail-oriented tasks.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of them have this remarkable ability to process visual information really quickly and accurately. They often notice details that others might miss.
So they might be really good at things like pattern recognition or spotting errors?
Exactly. And this strength can be super valuable in fields like graphic design, computer programming, engineering.
Those are all fields where attention to detail is super important.
Right. And beyond visual thinking, many individuals with ASD have incredible memory skills.
Oh, wow.
Particularly for factual information or specific areas of interest. This can lead to them becoming experts in subjects like history, science, math.
It seems like we need to reframe how we think about ASD, recognizing that those differences in brain wiring can actually lead to some pretty amazing strengths.
100%. And that's where the concept of neurodiversity comes in. It's about understanding that everyone's brain is wired differently.
Right.
And those differences are not deficits. They're variations that contribute to the richness of human experience.
It's important to remember that ASD is not some rare condition. It's pretty common. It affects a lot of families and communities.
Absolutely. And as awareness grows, I think it's crucial to address some of the myths and misconceptions that are still out there.
Oh yeah, myth-busting time. Let's tackle those head on.
One of the biggest ones, and honestly one of the most harmful, is the link between vaccines and autism.
Right.
This has been completely debunked by countless scientific studies.
Yeah, it's important to stick with the science.
Right. Vaccines are safe and effective, and they're crucial for protecting public health.
Okay, so vaccines are out. What other misconceptions about ASD do you find yourself addressing often?
Another big one is this idea that autism is something to be cured. That whole perspective really misses the mark.
Yeah.
ASD is not a disease to be eradicated. It's a different way of being, a different way of experiencing the world.
Right. It's about embracing neurodiversity and recognizing the value of different perspectives and ways of thinking.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Instead of trying to cure ASD, we should be focused on creating inclusive and supportive environments where people with ASD can thrive, celebrate their strengths, contribute their talents to the world.
I love that. So we've talked about the strengths, but let's be realistic for a minute. What are some of the challenges that people with ASD and their families actually face in the real world?
Well, unfortunately, societal stigma and a lack of understanding are still big barriers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Individuals with ASD can experience discrimination, bullying, social isolation,
It's heartbreaking.
and families often struggle to find the resources and support they need.
Like what kinds of things?
Oh, finding qualified therapists, navigating the education system, accessing respite care, just to get a break.
Right. It can be a lot to handle.
It is.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of raising awareness, promoting acceptance, making sure these families feel supported.
Oh, for sure. And that work starts with each and every one of us.
What can we do?
It's about challenging our own assumptions, educating ourselves and others about ASD, advocating for policies that promote inclusivity, and actually support the needs of people with ASD and their families.
That's a powerful call to action. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the challenges that we forget about the amazing contributions that people with ASD make to the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you have any example, like real-life stories of people with ASD who've really used their strengths to achieve incredible things? Because I think those stories can be so inspiring.
You know, you're so right. Stories have the power to change hearts and minds. And there are so many examples out there. For instance, have you ever heard of Dr. Temple Grandin?
Oh, yeah.
She's amazing, renowned animal scientist and autism advocate.
Right.
She's revolutionized the livestock industry with her designs of handling facilities. They reduce stress for animals.
Yeah.
It's incredible work.
It is. And it's amazing how she's used her understanding of animal behavior to create these more humane and efficient systems.
It really is. Her success is a testament to embracing neurodiversity and recognizing those unique talents that people with ASD bring to the table.
Are there other figures that come to mind?
Oh yeah, tons. Think about Greta Thunberg,
Oh, of course.
young climate activist.
Yeah.
Her focus, her passion for her cause, and her ability to explain complex issues in a way that people understand.
Right.
It's mobilized millions around the world to take action on climate change.
Those are really powerful examples. And they really highlight the importance of shifting our focus from what people with ASD can't do to what they can do.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone has the potential to contribute, to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that includes people with ASD. We all have unique strengths and talents to offer. And when we create a society that values and celebrates those differences, everyone wins.
Well said. This deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered so much ground, from the challenges to the incredible strengths.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
But I think what really sticks with me is the importance of empathy, acceptance, and creating a world where neurodiversity is celebrated.
You got it. It's about recognizing that everyone, regardless of their neurotype, deserves to feel valued, respected, included.
Wow.
And when we create that kind of world, a world that embraces diversity in all its forms, that's when we unlock the true potential of humanity.
As we wrap up this deep dive into ASD, I'm feeling a mix of things.
Yeah, I mean,
Hope because of all the advancements,
absolutely.
but also this sense of responsibility, we all have a role to play in making the world a more inclusive place for people with ASD and their families.
I couldn't agree more. This isn't just an issue for, scientists or doctors. It's something that affects all of us.
Right.
We all have a responsibility to learn, to challenge stereotypes, to speak up for policies that support people with ASD.
So for our listener out there who's ready to take that next step, what resources would you recommend? Where can they learn more, connect with others, get involved?
There are some amazing organizations out there doing really great work.
Okay.
Autism Speaks, for one.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
They're a global organization, tons of resources. They fund research, advocate for the needs of individuals with ASD and their families.
That's great.
Their website is a great place to start. It's really comprehensive. It covers everything from the early signs of ASD to treatment options, support services, you name it.
Awesome. And I'm thinking there must be some local organizations too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Many communities have local chapters of Autism Speaks.
Okay.
Or other groups specifically dedicated to serving people with ASD and their families. They might offer things like support groups, social skills training, workshops for parents, even respite care services.
It sounds like there's a whole network of support out there waiting to be tapped into. And you know what? I'd love to hear from you, our listener. What resonated with you most from this deep dive? What questions do you still have? What surprised you? We're all in this together, so share your thoughts, share your experiences.
To truly understand ASD, I think it's so important to listen to the voices of people with ASD themselves.
Right.
They're the experts, right? Their perspectives are so valuable in shaping our understanding and our actions. Read their stories. Watch their TED Talks. Let their voices guide you.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
So as we leave you with a final thought to ponder, I want to circle back to something you said earlier. How can we, as individuals and as communities, better support and empower people with ASD to reach their full potential?
Yeah.
Let that question guide your actions, your conversations, your advocacy.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said.
And we need to take it together.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into autism spectrum disorder.
To and pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep those conversations going.